So let's start. Just so everyone knows, and particularly if people aren't here, this is probably going to be the last video. Too many people aren't showing up to class and they're trying to use videos as a substitute. It's not going to work for them. Won't hurt anyone who's here. But if they're going to try that, I just can't do it in good conscience because it's just not a good way to learn. It finds a supplement, it's a complement, they're not fine as a substitute. And if there's a big drop off like last time with the break, I'll probably just turn it off then because it's pretty disappointing. So if I have to make it costly to this class to get people to show up, then that's what I have to do. But I'm hoping I don't have to.
Why don't we use videos as like a reinforcement tool?
What's that?
Why don't we use the videos as like a reinforcement tool? Like, teaching the camera on together, people will show up.
We'll see what happens. I'm annoyed today. Halloween, or not since Halloween effect going on. Suppose I could pass with it. Then, I mean, I'll think about it. Anyway, last time I couldn't get the stupid technical stuff to work. And so, let me start with that this time. I just wanted to show you some things we were talking about. So, last time we were talking about some labor market statistics, and I wanted to show you some pictures, and I wasn't able to do it, so I figured out how to make it work. So anyway, this is the, I'm not sure that's the one I wanted to start with, but this is one of the ones that is very key. Let me go over here the unemployment rate. So here's the unemployment rate. And notice that it's been coming down fairly rapidly recently, and so that makes it look like there's a great big improvement in the economy. Okay. But we said one of the problems with the unemployment rate is what? If people leave the labor force, what happens to the unemployment rate? It goes down. So what we might want to know about is some other statistic like the employment to population ratio. So this is a percentage of the population that's employed. To me, this is a much better indicative statistic. And you can see by this measure, there hasn't been a lot of recovery. Now that also might be polluted by the fact we've got a big baby boom that's hitting retirement age. And some of those people that are in the population may not be working because they're older and that sort of thing. And so there's some discrepancy there. But the employment to population, really took a dive during the recession. And we really haven't seen much of a recovery at all in the percentage of people that are working of the population. So that tells you that a lot of the movement you're seeing in the unemployment rate, that downward movement, is simply people moving out of the labor force. And one of the big open questions, one of the things we don't know, is how much this is going to recover as things improve. Because we're going to have a lot of people hitting retirement age and moving out of the labor force. We don't know quite what age are going to do that. We've got people going on disability to sort of get on benefits because there's no jobs, those roles are going up. And so exactly how the demographics are going to work is pretty hard to predict right now. So there's a lot of different assumptions about what this trajectory will be, and that's going to have a lot to do with what you think sort of the optimal unemployment rate ought to be, and how much stimulus you ought to put in place and that sort of thing. But that's really an open question. You can see that it's been climbing for a long time, sort of stabilized a little bit. Maybe there's a slight upward trend here, and then it just took a dive. And then how many of these people are going to stay out permanently? One of the things that long-term unemployment does is you tend to have people that get permanently unemployed, they get permanently detached from the labor force, they go into the underground economy, they start working under the table and not paying taxes, so you don't see them. They go live with their parents or their kids or something like that, and just Or, you're 59, you can retire at 62, you just find a way to make it through the next 3 years somehow by living off savings or something, and take Social Security. Or maybe you go back to work. And so we don't know about all those changes and how they're going to play out over time. So it feels a little bit better about the number of people. Straggling. But anyway, so I just wanted to point this out that, that the unemployment rate, as you look at the labor force statistics, are not the only thing that we ought to be looking at. The other one I pulled up here was the civilian labor force participation rate. And this is some indication of the demographics. You can see the percentage of people that have been participating, it's sort of climbed, particularly as women entered the labor force in the early 70s, 60s, when my mom finally went to work in your mom. That's all went up. And then, oops. The X marks. Could have been more embarrassed. Sort of leveled off, came down a little bit, starting with the last recession, started to level off, maybe even climb a bit again, and then again took another big dive. Some of that is demographics. The population is getting older on average in the U.S. And some of that is just people dropping out of the labor force because the conditions are really bad. Again, we don't know how much this is going to come back as conditions improve. This hasn't even turned around yet. These are the latest data. And so the participation rate, the number of people that are participating in the labor force of the population. So this is the labor force over the population has been declining. It's currently what? About 63%. It's about 2/3 of the people, the population work. Now you have to remember the scale of this. This is from 58 to 68. So we've blown out the small scale. The magnitudes aren't on the scale. Let me just show you this while I got it up here. I'm going to talk about this in a second, but this is movements in unemployment. So in a second here, we want to talk about what makes the unemployment rate move around. And so, what is this here? So this is the unemployment rate, right? Yep. So there was sort of an upward trend up until the 1980s. If you look at this graph, on average, the unemployment rate seemed to be rising, and the natural rate of unemployment seemed to be rising. It seemed to hit a peak around 1980, and then it seemed to be declining back more towards where it used to be. So if we think of sort of the natural rate of unemployment as the average rate of unemployment, it looks like it took a big increase there. And you can explain that because you have a lot of new people entering the labor force, and new entrants tend to have a lot of frictional unemployment. There was a lot of structural change going on in the economy as units came in. There was a lot of industrialization and globalization, all those kinds of things that contribute to a higher natural rate of unemployment. Then it seemed to recover, and then it's gone way back up again, and we don't know for sure, again, how far it's going to come back down. But one of the questions you can ask is, well, what drives movements in unemployment? Is it people getting fired at a higher rate? So when you go into a recession, is the reason why unemployment changes because a lot more people get fired? Or is it because a lot less people get hired? So remember, there's this pool of unemployed. We have a flow into that as people get fired. We have a flow out as people get hired, and the other one as they go out into the labor force. That triangle we did last time. Well, what this shows you is, so this is the unemployment rate here, the red line. And the blue line is, this is the rate of job finding. So this is the number of jobs. This is the hiring rate. So it looks like part of the change, these are on different scales, so that the difference between them isn't that important. But part of the reason why unemployment varies is clearly the job finding rate. The number of jobs that corporations offer goes way down in recessions and goes way up in recoveries. And so we saw, for instance, at the very trough of the recession, something like 7 people for every job, 7 unemployed workers looking for every job open. I think that's down to about 3 to 1 right now. So the job hiring rate has been rising, But the job finding rate therefore rises because the probability of finding one's a lot higher. If it's 3 to 1 than if it's 7 to 1. So clearly, part of the reason why unemployment moves around is because there's changes in the rate in which firms offer jobs. But as you might expect, there's also a relationship on the other side. So this is the separation rate. So this is the number of people that are fired or quit each month. And that also moves very closely with the unemployment rate. So it's probably about half of both, that in recessions, it's both less hiring and more firing that's driving movements in the unemployment rate. And when you get into deep recessions like we're in, you get much less quits because people don't have other jobs to go to, and so you don't have a lot of bargaining power with your boss to say, I'm going to go somewhere else. And you might lose your health insurance and not be sure you can get it and all those sorts of things. And so you don't see people quitting at the same rates in the trough of the recession as you do in good ones. So probably when you get into these recessions, this is more firings than it is quits. Because separations is both quits plus layoffs, firings. But quits go down in recessions and firings go up. Overall, it tends to drive the unemployment rate. There's a little bit of a blip up there. The unemployment rate's still going up, yet the separation rate's going down, but that could just be a lag like you see sometimes in the data. Anyway, so that's some stuff about unemployment. We try to make sure you know what we're doing. So we're starting to talk about the labor markets. What we've done so far is we've talked about a goods market. We did a 45-degree line diagram, then we did an IS curve. We had a money market, or a financial market, and we did the money demand, money supply, and from there we derived an LM curve. We put these together in IS-LM diagram. And what we'll do either later today or next time is turn that into an aggregate demand curve. So what we've been doing is working on the demand side of the model. We can use IS-LM. The LM curve depends on M over P. So when P changes, the LM curve moves around, and that's going to change output. So we can get a relationship between P and Y and how we aggregate demand. We'll do that later. What we're doing now is we're going to look at the labor market. We've started just by looking at unemployment. So we'll look at a labor demand, labor supply. It'll be a little bit different than this. They'll call it a wage setting and a price setting equation. But we're basically looking at labor demand, labor supply, plus a production function. And what that's going to give us is an aggregate supply curve. Then we're going to put aggregate demand and aggregate supply together. We can integrate our short-run model with our medium-run model and talk about when we have a shock to the money supply or a recession like we have now in the short run, here's what we expect to happen. In the medium run, this is what would happen. And later, of course, in the last half, we'll look at the longer run stuff and talk about how the long run stuff changes around over time as well. But for now, we're just putting this together. So we're just starting the labor demand, labor supply, and we should come up with some diagrams later today and then also derive an aggregate supply curve so you can do the homework I posted on Tuesday. Let's do next Tuesday. So that's what we're doing. So we need to start talking about the labor market so we can build the aggregate supply curve and the production function. The production function is just, you put labor and capital together and it spits out output. Okay, we've talked about movements in the unemployment rate already. So this is the section in the book called wage determination. So now we want to start talking about how wages are determined. We're going to start off making some verbal arguments about bargaining power and some other sorts of things. And then we'll write down a specific graphical and algebraic model that gets at this. So just some facts to begin with. So the first is that workers are typically paid a wage greater than what we call the reservation wage. That is reservation wage is the wage that would make you indifferent between working and not working. So there's some wage at which I would say, you know, I'm not going to do this job anymore. And today it's higher than it was. I'd say I'd just rather stay home. It's pretty low because I kind of like doing this. I'm kind of lucky, but at some point, you know, $10 per class, no, I'm probably not going to take that. And so there's, for every job, there's some wage for every worker where you just be indifferent between staying home and going to work. Or there's, you're at home, they keep offering, okay, 10 cents an hour, $1 an hour, $1.50. At some point, you say, okay, I'll take that one. That's the reservation wage. And so then the question is why? So that's the first fact. And we'll try to explain this. Why are workers paid more than you need to pay them just to get them to show up for the job every day? So if you just want them to show up at 8 a.m., why do you pay them more than that? And then this is obvious, but we'll write it down here. Wages typically depend upon labor market conditions. So when the unemployment rate goes down, we tend to see wages going up. Now, the book doesn't talk a lot about this, but I think it's a really important fact about wages. There's also what we might think of as downward wage rigidity. This is true. Okay, there doesn't seem to be a lot of upward wage rigidity. Wages rise pretty easily. They don't fall as easily. During the recession, there's a big, if you look at the distribution of wage changes during the recession, there's a graph from the San Francisco Fed I should have brought. And there's another one too, I have somewhere. There's a big spike at zero. Because even though there was pressure to lower wages, firms didn't do it. So for their they hired new workers at lower wages. That was easy. But for their existing workers, you didn't see a lot of workers having to go face their boss and say, look, I'm going to cut your salary from $40,000 to $30,000 because it's tough. That happens. I mean, it happens sometimes, but the distribution is way asymmetric. So you see much easier wage increases than you see wage decreases. And that's an important fact for sort of explaining why monetary shocks have important output effects when it comes to labor. So there do seem to be these downward wage rigidities, at least in the U.S. Another thing that we should recognize, in the U.S., collective bargaining, this wasn't always true, but it is now. Unions are not very important. only about 10%, approximately 10% of wages are set through union bargains. See, one reason why you might think that wages are higher than the reservation wage is that unions are giving workers collective power, and they're able to demand higher wages than they would be under, say, a system where they didn't have a union. But that doesn't seem to be the case. Maybe in other countries where unions are important, that's true, but in the US that just doesn't seem to be the case, that unions are the reason why we see wages in excess of the reservation wage. So then we could say, if there's little bargaining power through unions, why are wages higher than they need to be? So then the next question is, yes?
What's that little sign
That's approximately. So it's an equal sign with a squiggly line on top of it. Sometimes they just do two squiggly lines, but that more means similar to. So I didn't want to confuse it with that. It means approximately. If little bargaining power through unions why is the wage greater than the reservation wage? And there's two answers. One is, even without unions, workers have some bargaining power. And secondly, and I'm going to talk about each one of these, so I just want to name them. Then there's something called efficiency wages. That's the old Ford story. The model, I guess let me be a little more explicit about the model. In the background of this, firms have some market power. So in the US, the typical market's not purely competitive, it's more monopolistic competition. So modern macro tends to model firms as price setters and monopolistically competitive price setters. So that means that price exceeds marginal cost. So there's a surplus to bargain over. There's something in excess of what you need to stay open. They're also earning reservation profits to some extent. Firms are earning more than they need to earn to stay in business if price is greater than marginal cost. Because price equals marginal cost is a zero profit condition. When you have monopoly power, you have positive profits. That's one of the efficiencies, right? So there's something to bargain over between firms and workers. And then the question is, who has the most bargaining power when you sit down at the table? And some people think what unions do is equalize the bargaining power between, say, a big firm and the individual worker. But it's a question then of dividing the surplus between those two groups, and it's a question of bargaining power. And so the more bargaining power that workers have, either through unions or other means, if they've got specialized skills, if you're the only one who can throw a baseball 109 miles an hour, I don't think anyone can, then you have bargaining power because you've got a special skill that nobody else has. You can probably earn a great big monopoly rents, monopsony rents in that case, in baseball. So if you have something other people don't have, anything that gives you bargaining power, the negotiation is going to let you push that wage up higher and above what it would take you to play in the NBA or the NFL. You take 100,000 and you get 900. That's the wage in excess of the reservation wage. It's because they have bargaining power. And so, so how much bargaining power? So let's look at this one. How much bargaining power you have a worker has depends upon two things. I'm just taking this right out of the book today. First is how costly it would be to replace the worker. If there's high training cost, if your firm has lots of specialized skills, once that worker's acquired that specialized skill, they could say, I'm leaving now. And you have to say, well, I have to pay this other person this huge training cost, so I'd rather give you a little boost in your salary above what it would take to keep you here than have to pay all those training costs and deal with new workers all the time. That kind of thing. How many games you lose extra if you didn't have this person playing for you. So the costlier it is, the more bargaining power, the more costly it is. So if there's government rules about employee protection that make it hard to fire people, that would make it more costly. Those can differ across countries. For instance, in Europe, there's much more protections than in the US. And then how hard it would be to find another job. If it's easier, that gives the worker more bargaining power. That's what the draft does, right? Tries to take away the bargaining power because then you can't. But then they got sued for that, and they lost. You can take away the bargaining power by not letting someone play for another team. Having rules about that. Then the worker can't just take all of your profits away. So in recessions, you would think that workers have less power because it's harder to find a job. So think of this person with specialized skill. They say to the boss, okay, I've got all these specialized skills, I'm going to quit. You're going to have to hire someone else and train them, so pay me more. And the boss says, well, it's the deepest recession we've had since the Great Depression, and you're not going to find another job. So yeah, it's not a credible threat. So go ahead and try. And you say, okay, I was just bluffing. Didn't really mean it. You just take me back. You have more bargaining power than your spouse, and you have lots of outside offers. Not how it's supposed to work. We really need to go through that. Yeah. So, the nature of the job then is going to matter. So there's two implications. The nature of the job matters. So they use McDonald's as an example of a job that requires very little training. Actually, I think they do quite a bit of training there, a lot more than some places. But if you've got a job where it's not very specialized, there's not a lot of training, anyone can do it, you're not going to have much bargaining power. You're here because you want to try to get bargaining power with your specialized skills and take those to the labor market and get a higher wage. And so, what kind of job you have matters. And is what we were just saying here, labor market conditions matter. Because it's going to be harder to find a job. This more has to do with this one. How costly it is, and labor market conditions about how hard it is to find another job. And so all of those things are going to matter for bargaining power. Okay. The other major explanation besides bargaining power for why wages are higher than they need to be. Okay. So we're trying to explain this, why are wages higher than minimum they need to be to get people to show up for the job. The one answer is you've got these specialized jobs, labor conditions matter. Efficiency wages is the other explanation for this. So this is, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but this is the Henry Ford story. Do you know that one? Where he paid way back when a lot more than any other factory paid. Then the workers were the best and most productive workers that were out there, and they actually made up for the increase in the wage by being more and more productive. And so what you can think of is if you increase the wage, that increases your costs. But it might also be the case that productivity goes up, maybe because morale, you might call it, goes up. And that causes costs to go down. So even if you're at the reservation wage, the person may just be showing up with an attitude like, okay, I don't really care, I'm sort of indifferent between doing this stupid job and going home. I don't care if I lose it, I go down the street and get the same stupid job. I just don't care. Fire me. And so you don't get much out of them. See, student workers actually pretty good. They're conscientious. You see people like that all the time. But if you're paying them twice what they could earn at McDonald's, and you're at Burger King, they might care more. They might work harder and treat the customers better, be worried about losing their job. And that might be better for your business than having disgruntled workers who do show up, but don't really care. So efficiency is just about how productive and how hard they work. And sometimes it's the case that raising wages. And you can say, well, that's kind of a general proposition, and you want people, the book says there's a general proposition, and you want people to feel good about coming to work, or at least want to be there, and want to try to do a good job, and that requires you pay them perhaps more than what they need just to be induced to make sure they can feed their families. So that, in developing countries too, you can actually have wages that are so low that people don't get enough nutrition. And by raising wages, they can get more food, they're healthier, and you get way more productivity out of them. So you can pay them this really low subsistence wage. You get them to show up to work. If you pay them a little more so they can actually be healthy, they can do way more than it costs you to pay more just because they're healthy, good workers. And so in international markets, you see different explanations of this efficiency wage. But it always comes down to the same thing. It's by some mechanism, you raise wages and you induce people to be more productive. And that can, this isn't always true, but it can at times then cause you to actually reduce your costs if this effect dominates. Okay, now let's get to the labor market. So this is a section called Wages, Prices, and Employment. So what the book tries to do is going to capture this discussion we have. There's more formal ways to derive this, but I'm going to we'll skip those. W equals PE. I'll explain all these terms. F of U and Z. This is going to be what we call our wage setting equation. So W is the nominal wage. So this is the nominal wage. That's just what you get paid each month, each week, whatever it might be. This the expected price level. So that E just means expected price. U is the unemployment rate. And this is all other things. It's a catch-all. All other things that affect the wage. We'll give some examples so you see what we mean here in a moment. And this is a negative relationship here and a positive relationship there. So when Z goes up, wages go up. When U goes up, wages go down. So that's what it is. So let's talk about this PE term. Why is that there? What's that all about? What workers care about, you could also write that as W over PE equals F of U and Z, like this. So this is just capturing how nominal wages are set. So this is a wage setting equation. And it's based upon the expected price. So given that expected price, this unemployment rate, and this, all these other things that might affect it having certain values, that's the wage that we see in the market, in the labor market. Now, what workers care about is their real wage, their nominal wage divided by the price level. But when you negotiate your wage, say at the beginning of the year, January through December, and then you're going to negotiate here again next January, so that's how it works at this for every January, you sit down with the boss and you negotiate. You don't know what the price level is going to be. Your wage is going to be fixed all of that period. And you don't know what the price level is going to be necessarily between the time. You're right here. That's you. And you're not there yet, so you're setting the wage for the coming year. So what you have to do is the higher you think prices are going to be during that year, the higher the wage you want to try to negotiate, that you demand just to work. Your reservation wage is not the real wage. So if prices are going up, then it's going to take a higher wage to get you to work the same amount. So what workers have to do when they negotiate is based upon the expected price level, not the actual price level. Because they don't know what it's going to be yet. So when this negotiation comes about and wages are set, one thing that matters is the expected price level that workers have. If they have perfect foresight, it would be the actual price level. This is going to allow them to make mistakes. So in the model, they're going to negotiate a wage. It's going to stay fixed for the year. It's based on a particular price expectation, and the price happens to be different. Their real wage is going to be different than they thought. And that's going to have implications for the short run. The unemployment term ought to be obvious. Is that obvious? When the unemployment rate goes up, wages go down for obvious reasons. Excess supply of labor drives the price of labor down. When unemployment goes up, there's more people looking for jobs, so it drives wages down. So unemployment is obvious. When unemployment goes up, wages go down. That's why it's a negative sign. So what are all these other factors? Unemployment insurance. That would give workers more bargaining power, right? When you're trying to decide if you want to take a job and the person says, I'll pay you this amount. If you're not eating every day, you might take it. You've got unemployment insurance and you have some ability in food stamps and that kind of thing, then you have more bargaining power when you're looking for jobs. And there's a good side to that too. that allows better matching. But things like unemployment insurance or food stamps or those kinds of things. It makes workers less likely to take a job offer, they're less desperate, so it gives them more bargaining power in negotiations. And so it also makes it easier for you to quit to take another job. So it makes threats more credible. If you say to the boss, okay, you either pay me more or I'm going to quit. If there's unemployment compensation, you can survive by doing that. I suppose you're not really supposed to quit to do it. Anyway, food stamps and other things. So it just gives the worker more bargaining power than what that otherwise. Minimum wage might be another example of a factor. The minimum wage goes up, but a lot of wages are also a status thing. And so people will care if they get paid $1 more than someone else. And so when the very bottom comes up, that tends to push the whole distribution of wages up. Because you want to preserve the distance between wages as a status thing. And so when the minimum wage goes up, you tend to see wages going up. So that would be another factor that would address it. Anything you can think of, you say, okay, here's something, would it affect the wage? The answer is yes, and that's just a Z thing. Or it's just a catch-all for all these other things. Employment protection. That makes it more costly for firms to fire people. If it's more costly to fire people, it gives you more bargaining power, it's going to drive wages up. So if there's more employment protection, that's also going to drive wages up. Minimum wage goes up, wages go up. Unemployment insurance goes up, wages go up. Again, you have more bargaining power. And we'll look at some other ones later. So that's wage setting. Depends on those three things, and one of them just captures anything we can think of that might affect the wage. Okay. Now let's look at the price setting plan. We're going to take a very, very simple, so this is price determination. So costs really depend upon the nature of the production function. We're going to assume a production function. So we're going to start with a production function. You know what I mean by that? Y equals A, N. Where N is the number is labor, that's the number of workers, and Y is output. Now sometimes you put a coefficient here, like an alpha there or something, you probably did in 311. In Cobb Douglas, so we get Y equals A, N to the alpha, K to the Y minus alpha, and things like that. This is just a very simple linear production function where Y is just A-N. So A is just a number, like 11. It's really the productivity of labor. Because the change in Y due to a change in N is A. So later on in the course, when we start talking about economic growth, we'll call this AT, and we'll let it grow over time as productivity grows. So the same amount of labor gives you more and more output because you get better and better machinery and that sort of thing. So A is capturing labor productivity. For now, we're going to hold productivity constant, or just change it in single increments, because we're not doing economic growth yet. So we're going to have Y star fits, and we're looking at variations around Y star, which are cycles. So we're looking at business cycles, how you move away from Y star in the short run, and how you move back in the medium run. Then when we do the long run, we'll talk about economic growth, how that Y star moves over time. So right now, what we're actually going to develop is we're going to write down a model of the natural rate of output. That's where we're headed. Because this is the medium run that we're in. We haven't integrated yet, so we're in the medium run. Now, what we can do is measure, we can normalize without losing any generality for A equals 1. All I have to do is change my units. This could be dollar, it could be tens of dollars, it could be, in units of, if I make the units right, I can make A 1. So I can set A equal to 1 without any loss of generality whatsoever. So for us, production is the number of labors. Y equals N. We've just normalized output. A unit of output is the number of things one person can produce. That's the normalization. So we call that 1 unit of GDP is what one person can produce. In whatever time period. Yes?
And that was called the price level equation.
We're looking at price determination. We're not there yet. That's just the, Now we'll get to that. We're going to come back to this, so set that aside for a second. Under pure competition, remember that price equals marginal cost. But many markets are not competitive. So we think on average it's more like monopolistic competition, because we're looking at the average firm in the economy. And the average firm is not a competitive firm in the U.S. economy. They have market power, they have brand power, and that sort of thing. So monopolistic competition seems to capture it better. Well, when that's true, price is greater than marginal cost. That's what I was talking about earlier. You earn more than you need to earn to bring those resources to market. This is sort of the reservation price. This is if you get more than that. So we're going to write price equals 1 plus M times W. In our model, this is the marginal cost. If I hire one more unit of labor, I pay them W. So the marginal cost of one more unit of labor is W. That's how it's defined. That's what it is. So if this is a per day model, we're talking all this about per day. This is the wage per day. That's the marginal cost that I have to pay that person for one more unit of labor. Then price does not equal marginal cost. It's greater than, so M is greater than 0. So price is a markup over W cost. So M is the markup. M is, if it's 0.05, you've got a 5% markup over marginal cost. So M is called the markup. That is the price setting equation. So we're going to use that as this is how prices are set in the economy. They're a markup over marginal cost, and marginal cost is W. They're a markup over marginal cost because we have monopoly power. They're monopolistically competitive. So now we can find the natural rate of unemployment fairly easily. So W equals PE, F of U and Z, the unemployment rate of this catch-all thing. And P equals 1 plus M times W. That's all we need. So we're going to start with P equals PE, because we're in the medium run. And we're assuming that in the medium run, expectations are correct. In the short run, they might not be, but in the medium run, they adjust so they're correct. So we're going to start in the medium, the long run equilibrium. The medium run equilibrium, sorry. It's usually the long run. I'm not sure I like the medium run terminology that it is. Should be the short run, the long run, the growth. That's it. that would be, to me, more intuitive in short run, medium run, and long run. But anyway, it's not that big of a deal. So under that assumption, we have W over P equals F of U and C, and W over P equals 1 over 1 plus M. Just, this is equal to P now. Just divide by it, just bring that on each side. See that easily enough? Simple algebra. Then W over P, oops. This is the real wage paid by firms. So the equilibrium is very simple. I'll draw a picture of it in just a second. The equilibrium is simply F of U and Z equals 1 over 1 plus M. Put unemployment on that axis and the real wage on this one. This is 1 over 1 plus M. That's this equation. That's that line right there. There's no U's in here, so it's horizontal. Doesn't matter what U is, it's the same value. This equation, we know that W over P and U are negatively related, right? We know that. So, there's F of U and Z. This is the natural rate of unemployment because expectations are correct. We're in the medium run. Medium run is going to be fine for now as expectations being correct. So enough time has passed. There's a single shock, you didn't know what happened, but enough time has passed, you found out about it, adjusted your expectations. So the medium run, your expectations catch up to whatever happened in the past. And the labor market clears. This in the background is the labor supply, labor demand model, and the equation relating to LTU that we're not looking at. But this is how you can find the unemployment rate. And it's just this point right here. That is just this point. This U is the U that solves this equation. That's the equilibrium. So this is the price setting relationship. And this was what we call the wage setting relationship. And that's the natural rate of unemployment. That's the full employment level of unemployment. Markets are clearing there. Everyone who wants a job has a job. They got full information. So this is the natural rate. Can't do any better than that. Okay. Now the natural rate is not fixed. So show me what would happen in the model if unemployment benefits got better. So let's start at equilibrium. 1 over 1 plus M. I'll give you a hint. Z0. Unemployment benefits are in Z. This is W over P. This is U and not.
Shift to the right.
Yeah. And then how can you tell this is positive? When Z goes up, if I hold the unemployment rate constant, what does WOP have to do? It has to go up. So wherever I pick, at the same level of unemployment, WOP has to be higher. You can do it the other way too. You could say, hold WOP constant. If Z goes up, the unemployment rate has to go up to keep it constant. So you can do it that way too. So if you keep WOP constant, U has to go up. So it must be that this shifts out. Like that. Now how far it shifts is a question here. I've made quite a dramatic shift here. It could be a tiny shift too, depending upon how much of an impact benefits have on the unemployment rate. So there's some people, like Casey Mulligan in Chicago, who would argue that the unemployment rate right now, the natural rate of unemployment rate is very high, like 6 or 7%, because we're so generous with our benefits to the unemployed. None of them want to work, they sit home and watch TV, and so you get this much higher natural rate of unemployment. My view is that's not quite right. There's a lot of evidence that unemployment compensation does have an impact on unemployment, but it's not a large one. The San Francisco Fed, again, has done a lot of work on this. That's one of the places I'm getting this evidence from. And it has some effect, but not a big enough effect to say that all the unemployment we're seeing right now is due to the natural rate. Instead, it's cyclical factors. It's something else. It's short-run stuff we want to do. See, if it's just a natural rate, you don't want to do anything about it because you're at the natural rate of unemployment. So there's nothing for monetary or fiscal policy to do to try to get you back to the natural rate. If it's already at 7.5%, we're almost there. But if the natural rate of unemployment is much lower, like 6%, then you've got a big gap to close with monetary and fiscal policy. And so how you think the natural rate varies with something like unemployment benefits or food stamps or other social programs is an important question. So is it a very big shift or is it just a tiny, 5% to 5.5%, or 5.3%, or is it 5% to 7%, 7.5%? So that the empirical stuff matters, but the direction is clear. Should check it out. Well, let me do the other one from the book. So what would happen, I'm going to cheat, pretend like I just reheard this. So, new one. What would happen if, as in the last few decades, antitrust enforcement became less rigorous? So we're talking about monopoly power, right? That's what antitrust enforcement is all about. Which equation has the monopoly power in it? P equals 1 plus M times W. This one. And what happens to the markup if you have more monopoly power? It goes up. And so the price setting equation would shift down. PS0, PS1. 1 over 1 plus M1. So what you should see is a lower wage, because firms have more power, lower real wage, and more unemployment. Because consistent with more monopoly power, remember it's inefficient. You produce less than the socially optimum amount. When you have monopoly power, there's wasted resources. And the more monopoly power there is, the more resources that get wasted. It's not efficient. So this is a way in which you can see some of the inefficiency from additional monopoly power. The point is, though, we can use this model to figure out what's going to happen to wages and what's going to happen to unemployment with a variety of changes. So if the minimum wage goes up, what do we think happens? Z shifts out, Z goes up, shifts this out, more unemployment. How much more? Depends again on how much the minimum wage matters.
Is that because people are more likely to stay in their position?
With a higher minimum wage?
Yeah. Is that why employment's going to increase?
This is more of an effect where you have, this is the status preservation.
Okay.
So when you lift you've got people working a little above the minimum wage in the same firm because they've been there longer. You raise them above this person, you gotta push them up, then you gotta push the people if you keep going, eventually hits some big gaps, you can kind of accordion the thing, but it tends to lift the whole distribution of wages up when you push the bottom up. Okay.
Can you explain the water line drop on the optic power?
Because 1 plus m went down. This is a bigger number, so 1 over a bigger number is a smaller number. More intuitively, it's because firms have more market power. Again, this is the real wage. You end up with a lower real wage than you have before. I'm afraid to take a break. Y'all gonna come back? So now we're just going to work with this a little bit and drive an aggregate supply curve. All right, let's do the break thing. Oh yeah, I have tests for the end of class too. Trying to get people incentive to stay. I got the tests. I'll hand it back at the end. I'll stop a little early. They have more bargaining, they have more power as firms, so it drives wages down. Firms have more power, that gives them more bargaining power. W over P goes up. Yeah. Yes. Otherwise, that's what we're thinking. The better explanation is that when you have more monopoly power, you get more unemployed resources because there's more inefficiency. So when there's more monopoly power, there's more inefficiency, there's more unemployment, and more unemployment drives down wages. More inefficiency, that is more unemployment. And that tends to lower wages.
That end zone, so like, I went to the car, I was like, trying to do that. He did it. And I went to go grab it, and he like ripped me down. So that's why I was
This is without a doubt the worst time to have a class. Nobody wants to be a part of 6.
Yeah, 4 6 is tough.
I do all the classroom assignments and then for the departments, I do all the scheduling all year, and the GTFs too. Someone has to teach at 4, and I do all my blog stuff from 8 to 12, and then work here from until 8, from like 12 to 8, so it works out for me to have my PhD class from 1:30 to 3:30, and then do this from 4 to 6. I don't have to ask anyone else to do it, plus I can stay up late and get up late and work in the morning as I need to. So. But the morale of the students this time of day is just tough to deal with. You look out.
And it's all waiting, so.
It's not, even when I go to seminar, I'll be out on Friday from 3:30 to 5, even with really good people, I find myself falling asleep. You know, there's some people that say anything, oh God. But it's really hard to remember that when you're up here and, you know, work hard on a lecture and everyone's going, melting in front of you. Oh, hell. Wish I had a joke. So, yeah, I'll stop early and pass back exams. It's not going to take all that long. Not that many people here. A lot to go through the walls, I would still think.
Do we get to keep them or do we give them back?
What was that?
Do we get to keep them or have to give them back?
You can keep them. They're yours forever.
Put on our
I
fridge.
still have all my test rights.
Put them on the fridge.
Somewhere. Oh, look at it. Thousands of people. Okay, I guess I gotta do this. Okay, let's start. Okay, we have a model of unemployment. What we need, though, is a model of output. So we're going to make the translation from unemployment to output. And we can do that with a production function. Now we're going to use that production function thing. So this is the section called from unemployment to employment. And then we'll go from employment to output, which is really hard because Y equals N. And is employment. That step will be trivial. Okay, so we're going to use the natural rate of unemployment to find the natural rate of employment. All we have to do is remember that the unemployment rate is the number of unemployed over the labor force. So U is the number of people that are unemployed, L is the labor force. That's the same as L minus N over L. So the number of people not working is the labor force minus the number of people employed. right? Labor force is 100, 80 people are working, 20 people are not working. So yeah, L equals labor force. It's that big, the civilian labor force thing. So we could say that the unemployment rate is 1 minus N over L. And this is what we were calling U a few minutes ago here. That's this U right here. Shorty choppy day, really. So if U equals 1 minus N over L, then N equals,
What's N stand for again?
what is what?
What does N stand for again?
N is the number of workers. That's employed. Number of people working. So N is L times 1 minus U. So define the natural rate of employment. This is, I hated this when I first saw the book, because this means natural rate, and this means employment. So it's N to the N, but it's not N to the N. The natural rate of unemployment. Let's call this N nat. Just so there's no, I'm going to use N's purely in a minute, but so if the labor force is 200 and the natural rate is 5%, like it was, say, in the 60s or the 80s, or the 90s, excuse me, the 90s. That was it was in the 60s, and the natural rate went up, and then it came back down in the 90s and spiked back up recently. Say it's 5%, then the natural rate of employment would be 200 times 1 minus 0.05, or 190 people. What's that?
You said it's equal natural rate, right?
Yes.
But you got the number of people.
Oh, I see.
This is the natural rate of employment.
Rate should be percent.
They're calling it a rate, but they mean the number of people. If you want to call it the natural number, that's fine. The book calls it the natural rate because they want to use the same terminology. We'll also say natural rate. You've been using this terminology without question all along, because we're going to write YN. And it's not a growth rate, that's like $17 trillion. So you already done that. There's also a natural rate of growth too, but it's common to call this a natural rate of output, even though it's a figure like 17 trillion. So. Mm-hmm.
So then that would be the natural rate of unemployment is what that is.
The natural rate of employment. The natural rate of unemployment is we could find the natural number of unemployed too. It's 10. Right? So you could also talk about the natural number of unemployed. That's the number of people working, it's 10. Then finally, there's the natural rate of output. Well, we know that y equals n. That's that a equals 1 assumption we did earlier. That's the production function. So the natural rate of output is the same as the natural rate of employment. And again, that's just L times 1 minus the natural rate of unemployment. So this is a percent. And this is a decimal unit. What we're going to want to know later is I'm going to use that 1 over 1 plus m line and the f line. And that's going to cause unemployment to change. This tells us that when unemployment, we could use it more generally, and even if we're not the natural rate, this is going to hold. So when unemployment goes up, what happens to output? Obviously it goes down, right? Because you have less people working on your labor force. And y equals n, so it must go down. So there you have it. Okay. So we can write 1 over 1 plus m equals f of u, but u is equal to 1 minus yn over L and z. Remember, un equals 1 minus n over L, and n equals y. What that is, and the book doesn't really tell you this, I wish it did. That is the long run supply curve. There's no P in here, right? You see a P? I don't. No P's. They cancel because PE equal P. So what we've developed is the long run aggregate supply curve. That's what yn is. And it shifts around if there's a change in monopoly power, or a change in one of these factors, or a change in the labor force without changing yn. So this natural rate can shift around. Later, we'll add that A thing back in. It'll show up right here, the A over 1 plus m. Productivity will matter too. It'll shift this line around. But right now, we've drawn the long run aggregate supply curve. Now we're going to start chapter 7 and add a short run AS that has a positive slope. Then we can put an aggregate demand curve on, and you'll have exactly the model we used in 202, but with a little stronger foundations than we probably developed there. So we're heading to a place that we should have already been. So let's start chapter 7. We're going to use the same two equations. W equals PE times F of U and Z. And P equals 1 plus M times W. But we're going to drop the assumption that PE equals P. We're not going to assume that anymore. And the reason is because we want to get the short run supply curve, not the medium run supply. I guess in this book, it's what most books call the long run supply curve. I guess technically they're kind of calling it the medium run supply curve. I don't like that term. I'll forget to call it long run. But it's the natural rate. We want the short run supply curve. In the short run, there's no reason to assume these are always the same. So let's get an equation for the supply curve. So remember that W equals P over 1 plus m. So I can set those equal, right? Where those two lines are equal, it's going to be where those. So I'll just set the w's equal. So it must be that PE f of u at z equals p over 1 plus m. So this is the equation of the aggregate supply curve. I'll drive it graphically in a second. So now we know that P equals PE times 1 plus m times f of u and z. We know that u equals 1 minus y over L. So P equals PE and 1 plus m f 1 minus y over L and z. This is the equation of the aggregate supply curve, the short run aggregate supply curve.
You write this over?
What's that?
Can you take a second to write this all down?
Yeah, go ahead. I was going to stop now. Check my email while you guys do this.
Yeah.
There you go. Go get a drink of water. All we did is two things. We just took these two things. Plug. You can do this another way. Just put this W into there, and you're done. Just put that W into there, and you'll get this equation. You'll get this equation. Then just use the definition of U. This is just the definition of U. It's 1 minus n over L. It's 1, right? So that's all we did. All right. When Y goes up, unemployment does what? This gets bigger. When Y goes up, unemployment must go down. This is a negative thing. So if unemployment goes down, what happens to the value of F? Goes up. Because this is a negative relationship. Y goes up, unemployment goes down. It's a negative relationship, so F goes up. So F goes up. That implies that P has to go up to keep the two sides equal. Right? If this goes up because Y went up, then P has to go up, all else equal. So when Y goes up, P goes up. I could have done it the other way. I could have said when P goes up, what happens to Y? It doesn't make any difference. So this aggregate supply curve must have a positive slope. P and Y are positively related. Now, what if PE goes up? Another thing to notice is that if PE goes up, it must be that P goes up with Y constant, right? Because P equals PE times 1 plus M times F of U and Z. So if this goes up, everything else equal, that has to go up. In fact, it goes up 1 to 1. If this doubles, all else equal, this doubles. So there's a 1-to-1 relationship between the two. so what we've shown is there's an aggregate supply curve. And it's based upon some price expectation. There's some price expectation in here. So suppose the expected price is P0. Here's P and here's Y. If you're correct at P0, you get the natural rate of output. Like, that's the point we found last time. That's the long run supply curve. Or the medium run supply curve. I'm not going to get that right. So that's the YN we just derived. That's the point where P and PE are the same. Now we're saying there's this other supply curve that varies in the short run. If you change P with PE fixed, you get movements along some short run supply curve. Then if the expected price goes up to say P1, what would happen here? This curve's going to shift up. So this might be the AS for PE equals P1, and that would be P1. So you have a whole family of supply curves, one for each value of PE. Now I want to make sure you can do your homework, so now I'm about to do the last two homework problems. Basically your homework this time is repeat what I did in class for the last 2 days. The essential pieces. So I need to get to this before I can stop. So let me do it graphically. Okay? So let's start with two graphs. This is our unemployment and wage. I'm going to do nominal wage, and this is going to be price and output. So they don't match anywhere. So one equation is W equals PE, F of U and Z. And the other one is W equals 1 over 1 plus M times P. So last time this was equal to P and we divided by the P's and we graphed W over P. This time I'm graphing the nominal wage because it's easier. So this horizontal line is now 1, let me just call it P0 over 1 plus M. And then this is PE0 F of U and Z. And the Z's don't change. So what we can do, there's a U0, and that'll map into a Y0. We did that a few minutes ago. We should have to take unemployment into output. But we know how they're related. When unemployment goes up, output goes down. So I'm not going to bother with all those equations. We know that, we'll just use it. So what we have here is, I don't want to match these, so let me just say, we have a P0 and a Y0. So at this price of P0, we get output of Y0 and unemployment of U0. We could also do price and unemployment, and we'll get the opposite curve. I want the supply curve. Now what's going to happen if price goes up is this will go to, did I write that right? Yes, I did. This will go up to, say, P1 over 1 plus M. So when price goes up, unemployment goes down, right? Unemployment goes down when price goes up. So output must have gone up, because unemployment went down. So you get Y1, P1, you get a positive relationship, an AS, for some fixed expectation. I'll get a different AS curve if I use a different expectation. But for that expectation, I get this supply. See what happened before when we had PE equals P? This other curve would shift to exactly go through this point so that you didn't get any change at all. That's why the supply curve was vertical. In the last model, we had P equals P. If you work it out, this would exactly shift to offset it. And so you get a vertical supply curve. And when price doesn't equal expected price, only one of them shifts, and you get movements in the unemployment rate. Because the W over P is just, the P's just cancel out. They don't come out of the solution with P equals P. Now they don't cancel anymore. If you look at the solution, P equals PE, if P equals PE, those drop out. The supply curve is just vertical. The price doesn't matter. So this is how you derive the short run supply curve. Now what if PE goes up? So let's just take two curves here. Here's an aggregate supply curve for PE equals P0. And let's just put ourselves at the natural rate to start off and make it simple. So over here we've got P over 1 plus M sitting there. This is P0. And this is PE0 being this F, right? And so we're at U0. With me? Now suppose that the price expectation goes up, so let PE go up. That's going to shift this like this, right? So there's P1E. So now the expected price level is P1, so that's the expected price level. That causes unemployment to go up to U1, right? So what did output do? Output went down. Has the actual price changed? No. So at the same price level, output is lower. So the supply curve must have shifted in. PE equals P1. In fact, it shifted exactly so that you're still at the natural rate when expectations are correct. So there is a long run supply curve in here for PE equals P. So when PE goes up, the curve shifts back in exactly that fashion. See that? And finally, what if Z goes up? I made up something on the homework, I don't know. What if food stamps go up or something like that? What if food stamps become more generous? Z goes up. What does that do? Well, do the same exercise. Start off with an aggregate supply curve. Let's just start off. This is P equals P0 at the natural rate, P0. Start off with your model. PE0, F of U, and Z0. P0 over 1 plus M, U0. Got it? I'm probably a little ahead. It was my first time using this model too, by the way. I had to learn it too. Never done the labor market quite this way before. I usually use labor demand, labor supply curves. I like it better. Doesn't matter. So what if Z goes up? What happens? Shifts it out to PE0, F of U and Z1. The only thing that changes is that P0 is still the same. Unemployment goes up, so output goes down. So it must be that at the same level of prices, output is lower. unemployment went up. So it must be that the aggregate supply curve shifted in. This is a change in the natural rate. So, yeah. Anyway, it has to be that the supply curve shifted in. Those are your last two. It does ask you what the intuition is. What's the intuition for the slope? What happens? How would you tell a story about? Let's do one of these shifts. Let's do this one. What's your intuition? If expected price goes up, what are workers going to demand? Higher wage. What's that going to do to firms' costs? Going to go up. So at the same price with higher costs, they're probably going to produce less. So the way to tell these stories is ask what happens to the wage. When Z goes up, that's more bargaining power. That pushes wages up. That pushes costs up, which tends to push production down. So those are the kinds of intuitive stories you want to tell. When price goes up with wages constant, that's the aggregate supply curve. When price goes up, they're more profitable, so they produce more. Because PE hasn't changed, wage won't change. So we simply today started with two equations. We said there's a wage setting equation, PE, F of U and Z. And we tried to tell stories about bargaining power and labor market, bargaining power here, labor market conditions, and how those affected the wage, and tried to justify those signs by telling stories about bargaining power and labor market slack. We then told a story about monopoly power, where price was a markup over marginal cost. We first did the medium run to get the natural rate of unemployment, and that was where PE equals P. We made the assumption that P equals P. We set these equal, that we can plug this into here, the prices drop out, and you get a vertical supply curve. You get a Y that doesn't depend upon P. This gave us a vertical long-run supply curve for Y. And then we talked about what might make that move around. M changes, or if Z changes, this moves around with M and Z. We then said, let's go to the short run, where PE does not equal P. Then we use these same two equations, and that gave us a different model. That gave us a short run AS curve that depended upon the value of PE. This point where PE is equal to P0, this long run supply curve, that depends upon M and Z. The short run supply curve depends upon PE. So it shifts around with changes in PE. The long run shifts around with changes in M and Z. Then we showed how to do all this both graphically and mathematically, so that's kind of what I think we did today. Okay. Cut it off right there.